Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined by my co-host, Rob Dunham.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Well, we have an excellent show in store for you. We will cover the box office and some of the interesting aspects of that. We will give you what to watch on a couple of different streaming services in case you're in the mood for a movie this week. We will hit up our watch list, movies that we've watched over the past week. Rob, should we get started?
Let's do it.
All right. So we're recording a little bit later in the week. So we are going to be looking at the box office from September 13th through 15th and talking about the results from there. And for the second week in a row at this point, Beetlejuice came in number one, did $51.3 million in week two. That represents a 53.7% drop off. So a very normal average drop off for Beetlejuice. It is at 187.7 million as of last weekend. So there's a very good chance it is over 200 million as we speak. Number two was a new entrance to the box office last weekend, and that was Speak No Evil. Did $11.3 million. Number three was Deadpool and Wolverine, did $5.2 million. It is at $621 million domestically. Yeah, that's
a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Number four came in with I Am a Racist, or Am I Racist? Not I Am a Racist.
Yeah,
Am I Racist?
I want to switch that around.
Am I Racist? The documentary came in fourth in its opening weekend at $4.5 million. And that was in 2,900 theaters, so a little less than 3,000 theaters. Speak No Evil was in 3,300 theaters. Or sorry, I was doing the averages, not the actual number of theaters. Theaters for Am I Racist was 1,500. Deadpool and Wolverine was in 3,000. Speak No Evil was in 3,300. Beetlejuice in 4,500. Just for a little comparison. Reagan came in fifth, did $2.9 million in its third week in the box office. That film has taken in $23.2 million. And that was in 2,400 theaters. So thoughts on the box office in general?
Beetlejuice coming right along. I think they have a pretty good third week too. And Deadpool seems like it's never. At some point it's going to be gone, but it's just it only dropped like 25% from the week before. So it's just, I mean, people are still going to see it.
Yeah. I attached a little article here that had some interesting facts. Beetlejuice is at 264 at this point, was at $264.3 million globally, 188 million domestically. So this is a movie that has caught on significantly more in America than it has internationally, which is interesting. Blumhouse's Speak No Evil came in yesterday was at 11.5 and the projection was 10. So it actually outperformed their original projection, which is pretty solid. Another one, if I can pull it up here. The movie Am I Racist did really well in terms of it being a documentary. It's the third highest opening for a wide release documentary per ComScore in the last decade, behind Angel Studios' After Death at 5 million, and Disney's 2017 movie Born in China did 4.79. So it was actually a very successful documentary in terms of overall box office. So interesting flurry of movies here. We've got one of the biggest performing movies we've seen in several years. You've got a well done documentary and a uh, phenomenon of a re-release, or not a re-release, a sequel follow-up from decades later in Beetlejuice. So interesting foray into the box office this week.
Yeah, I can say that I personally helped out with the Beetlejuice numbers by going to see it 3 times, and I'm actually going to see it a 4th time tomorrow. So
yeah, that'll do it.
got to get those numbers up. It's it'll be it will be in my top 5 at the end of the year. I'm not quite sure where to place it because even though I think it's phenomenal, it's really hard for me, even having seen it a few times, and I liked it more every time I've seen it, to put it above Furiosa or Dune Part 2, because those two are just,
yeah,
I think they're in another class so far. Let's see what you've got, Gladiator 2. Let's see.
Yeah, we'll see. That's the wild card.
Yep.
I have seen 3 of the top 5 so far.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the box office?
I don't have anything.
Okay. So now let's move on to our discussion for the week. This week's discussion, we are going to do a regular feature on this podcast, and that would be to pick a couple of streaming services, and each one of us will give you what to watch. So we'll give you 5 options that are available to you on this particular streaming service. Rob, tell us what streaming service you're doing.
So I chose Paramount Plus.
Okay.
Paramount Plus is really good, just in general, if you are looking to consume like a certain series. Like if there's a series you're looking at and you want to see all the movies in that series, Paramount Plus does a good job of getting those things together. So for instance, if you like Star Trek, all of the Star Trek movies are on Paramount Plus.
Yep. And the series.
If you like Mission Impossible, I think all the Mission Impossible movies, Paramount Plus, I think a couple of them you have to have the Showtime extension for, but you can find all of them on Paramount Plus. The first thing that I would recommend to watch on there is one of those series, and it's A Quiet Place, A Quiet Place, A Quiet Place Part 2, and A Quiet Place Day 1 now are streaming on Paramount Plus. And you don't need the Showtime add-on to watch any of those. They're all on the regular Paramount Plus service. And the neat thing about these movies, maybe less so with A Quiet Place Part 2, but I feel like they can each be watched on their own. Like you don't necessarily have to watch any one of them to watch the others. I think if you watch the first 2, it gives you a little bit more emotional impact or background for A Quiet Place Day 1, but I think A Quiet Place Day 1 is a fine movie on its own. So I'd recommend those 3, especially if you've seen the other 2 and have not seen the new one that came out this year. I would highly recommend checking it out. I thought it was very well done, A Quiet Place Day 1.
Yeah, especially if you've seen the other 2, it's definitely worth a watch.
The next one, following along in this kind of horror thriller genre, would be Stephen King's Doctor Sleep, starring McGregor and Rebecca Ferguson. It came out in the late 2010s, I want to say. Very, very good adaptation of this. If you don't know what Doctor Sleep is, it's a sequel to The Shining. So Doctor Sleep, Danny the boy is grown up. So it's basically exploring his haunted nightmares and just everyday life where random weird things are happening to him because of all the trauma he experienced as a kid. And Rebecca Ferguson and her crew of people are essentially a cult that steal people's souls to continue living and steal their dreams and their nightmares. And it's a really interesting idea and concept. I would say that you don't have to be a fan necessarily of like straight horror to like this movie. You also don't have to necessarily have seen The Shining to appreciate this movie, but again, kind of like Quiet Place Day 1, if you do see The Shining, it gives you a lot more emotional weight background story to Doctor Sleep itself. So I would recommend watching Doctor Sleep either by itself or checking out The Shining first.
Cool.
For something completely different, The Italian Job.
Yes.
Mark Wahlberg and Mos Def, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, from the I think it's 2002, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Also, the original Italian Job with Michael Caine is on Paramount Plus.
Hmm.
So if you want to compare and contrast those two movies, they're very different, but also have a lot of some very cool similarities to them. The Mini Cooper being one. And Michael, I think the original Italian Job is one of Michael Caine's best performances.
Hmm.
He plays that kind of leader of the squad really well. And the new one, it's like over 20 years old now. I think it's a pretty funny movie. And Mark Wahlberg fits in really well in that role of leading guy, but who's not super serious. Because he's never going to be like the most super serious guy. I mean, he's played some serious roles, but I think the role where he's supposed to be a serious guy, but is always joking around and you're always wondering what he's going to do fits him the best. So I think he fills that role really well in the Italian Job.
Yeah, it's a fun movie.
Another one I had is the one I went and saw recently at the drive-in theater, The Crow, with Brandon Lee. If you have not seen the original The Crow, you should check it out. I've heard that a lot of people really didn't like the new one. I actually didn't even get a chance to see the new one yet, but I didn't hear very good things about it, and it did really badly at the box office. I think it was out for like a week, and then it just vanished.
Yeah,
like disappeared into the abyss. But this movie was not very well received either when it came out, but got a huge cult following. A lot due to the fact that Brandon Lee tragically passed away soon after filming it, and so this is like his legacy, if you want to say that. And by no means is it like the best acted or best shot or best anything movie, but for a period piece like a 1990s sci-fi horror / thriller movie, it does a really good job of encapsulating, I think, a lot of the good parts of that time frame of movie making without having some of the downfalls of some of the movies that don't have the staying power. I think it's fairly well written, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. The Crow from 1994. That's when The Crow came out.
Yeah,
which
crazy.
When I went and saw it at the drive-in theater, it was the 30th anniversary.
Okay.
So the other two that I have here are movies that we talked about recently on the podcast in different discussion topics. Two movies I think that you should really watch if you have not watched. And we talked about them enough in the discussion topics. I don't think I need to go too deep into why you should watch them. We told you why you should watch them, so now watch them. One is the Minority Report with Tom Cruise. We talked about that in the sci-fi discussion. And then the other one is Shutter Island, which I talked about in the music discussion.
Yeah.
Starring Leonardo DiCaprio. And both of those movies are available on Paramount Plus. So just to recap here, we've got Shutter Island, Minority Report, The Italian Job, both the old and new versions, The Crow from 1994, Dr. Sleep, starring Ewan McGregor and Rebecca Ferguson, and the Quiet Place series, Quiet Place, A Quiet Place Part 2, and A Quiet Place Day 1. And all of these movies can be found on Paramount Plus.
Nice. So the streaming service I did was Amazon Prime. And my list isn't interesting because it's a mix of movies that I saw on the streaming service that I've never seen that I want to see. And two movies that I want to rewatch that I was like, oh, they're on there. I should rewatch that. So the first one is a new watch that I'm hoping to get to real soon, and that's Blue Angels. And that was the documentary on obviously the Blue Angels stunt plane crew. It was in IMAX theaters, which I thought would have been really fun to see that type of thing in an IMAX theater. I didn't get there, but I think the next best thing is to watch it. I'm sure it's really fascinating to watch the Blue Angels at work. and I'm really intrigued to see what that documentary is all about and how that has and the cool visuals that I'm sure you're getting, and just the insane closeness in which they fly like inches from each other. It's pretty crazy. So that's a new one. One of the ones I want to rewatch is The Menu, and we've talked about The Menu a number of times on this, but it keeps coming up where I keep like, oh, that seems great. So I'm like, no, I just need to watch it again. I've only ever seen it once, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm like, no, I need to go back and watch that one again. And I know this is a favorite of yours as well.
Yep.
Um, so another new one for me. Okay, I should say we've talked about The Menu a couple times, but I should say like it is a really interesting like drama thriller about a in particular a girl goes on a date with a guy to this fancy unique restaurant with this high-end chef, and what starts out as a normal meal gets very, very weird and very, very crazy very, very soon. And
Yeah, something happens about an hour in the movie and chaos ensues.
yeah, and it's fascinating, and you really aren't quite sure what's going to come next or how this is going to end. And that's the cool
Yeah,
part is with many movies you can kind of have a sense of how it's going to end. This one you don't, and that's really cool.
you kind of have this feeling as the movie's going along that you're like, something is just like a little off
Mm-hmm.
about all this, and then it goes from something might be a little off to 100 very, very quickly.
Yes. and, and it is a fascinating psychological drama. It really is. It's a lot of fun, and it's really interesting.
Ray Fiennes is amazing in that movie.
Yes. Yes. And so is Anya Taylor-Joy, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, Another new one. I've never seen Lawrence of Arabia.
Huh.
Yeah. So Lawrence of
I hear
Arabia,
it's long.
I hear it's long, and I hear it's interesting to some and not interesting to others. So it's such like a movie that gets talked about in some sort of mythical, sort of legendary status, but I've never seen it.
Yeah.
So I put it on my list because I probably should. It's one of those movies that I should just sit down and watch,
Yeah.
and I just never done it. Similarly, another one I've never seen is Manhunter, 1986 Manhunter. And this is the precursor to Silence of the Lambs,
Mm.
but with a different. It covers some of the ground that the TV series, the 3-season TV series, covers. Pre the arrest of Hannibal Lecter, and it has the character Will Graham in it. But it was done in 1986, and apparently it's a really good movie. And it was based on the original book that the author had written, but everyone kind of forgot about it after Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I'm curious to check it out because I do enjoy the other films in that series, and I've never watched the Manhunter movie, so I put
Hmm.
that on my list. Another
Yeah, I
one.
think
I
go,
what?
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would say Lawrence of Arabia, I think, is like Dune, but with less aliens.
Yes, it seems that way. The last one was one I found on here when I was looking around. I'm like, oh man, that was an interesting movie. I should watch that one again. And that's Bad Times at the El Royale. Have you
Hmm.
seen this one?
I've not seen it. No.
It's really fascinating movie. It All these different people with different motivations show up at this random like dead end hotel,
I remember seeing trailers for this when it came out and wanting to see it, but I don't think I ever actually did see it.
and it's similar to The Menu in that you don't really know who the characters are, why the characters are there. Something is off, and you're not quite sure what it is. And the whole time you're trying to gauge, okay, what's each character's motivation? Who's good? Who's bad? Why are they doing what they're doing? And um, there's even down to like the hotel manager. So it's kind of I don't want to say a locked room mystery, but the entire thing takes place basically in this hotel for the entire movie. And there's some really interesting cameos in it as well. Um, but it's similar to The Menu in terms of genre and style. I wouldn't say it's as good as The Menu is, um, but it's an interesting movie, and I think that's its best quality is that's interesting and it has some intriguing elements to it. And it has Dakota Johnson is one of the characters in there. Um, but yeah, it's a ragtag bunch of people in a hotel for a period of time, and you kind of get to figure out why they're all there and what their motivations for as things go awry. So that's my list for Amazon Prime. You should definitely check them out. I'm planning on watching some of those in the near future as well. All right, so we will conclude with our watch list movies we watched over the last week. Rob, what'd you watch?
So over the last week, I saw Beetlejuice again, as I mentioned.
Yep.
Better the third time than the second time. Better the second time than the first time. Really better the fourth time than the third time, and so on. There's just like there's little things I've seen every time I've watched a movie that,
yeah,
and hearing other people react to it and laugh at stuff that I thought was really funny was really cool too, because I think it is a very well done comedy. I think this week I may have seen the best and the worst horror movies, respectively, of the year that I've seen. So,
okay.
I saw Speak No Evil.
Okay.
James McAvoy. We mentioned that it finished second. Second.
Yeah, second.
Second in the box office, a little over $11 million this week. In the article, it mentioned that it kind of had like an art house feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've been to a lot of horror movies and several this year, and I would say a movie like Longlegs and what was the other one? Strange Darling. Those movies were a lot more art housey than Speak No Evil was. Speak No Evil had a lot better production. I wouldn't really call it an art house movie, although I could understand like the vibe, maybe people feeling that vibe from it. But incredibly well acted, a good story that didn't give everything away, let things unfold as it was happening, and you saw more and more of just how messed up the situation in the movie actually was. You kind of, it's like The Menu, you kind of have a feeling right from the beginning that something is just not quite right. And the more and more you learn, the more you realize just how absolutely insane James McAvoy's character is. He and his wife together and what they're actually doing, what they've actually done. One scene in particular, the little boy and the little girl go into this locked room that's in a carriage house and discover something, and it's pretty chilling. I recommend highly Speak No Evil. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, which is tied for the highest rating I've given a horror movie this year.
Nice.
On the other hand, Never Let Go with Halle Berry, I gave 1.5 stars out of 5. And as I told my friend when I gave that score, half the star was for the two 10-year-old boys who also acted in the movie for doing their best. Because when your movie is essentially carried by two 10-year-old ish, I don't know exactly how old they are, kids, it can be rough, and it was rough. And I also said in my personal review of this movie that the movie felt like it never quite figured out what it was trying to be. There's this evil presence that lurks in the woods around this house where Halle Berry and her two children find themselves, and the entire world has killed itself basically, and they have to stay attached to their house, and somehow through the power of friendship, whenever they're tied up with this rope that's attached to the foundation of the house, they can't be touched by the evil, which is, I mean, that's a thing. But you're never really quite sure if Halle Berry's telling the truth, if she's making this up. And by the end of the movie, you don't know if Halle Berry was telling the truth or if she was making it up, because they never really tell you what happened, like what's real. Like, is Halle Berry an alien? I don't know. Her skin melts away and she's a monster of some kind, and then she bursts into pieces and disappears. So I'm not really sure what's happening in the entire movie, and I was very confused. And there were some aspects of it that I thought were okay, but sometimes it's good to just watch a bad movie to remember that they exist. So if you want to watch a bad movie, just remember that they exist. I highly recommend going to watch Never Let Go. Otherwise, you can let it go.
Oh man, yeah, that's a fun one. That's
I,
interesting.
I hope Holly Berry is not watching our podcast because she'll be very sad.
I think we can probably somewhat guarantee that, but you never know. Yes. um, three movies of note for me. I did go see the documentary "Am I Racist?" It was funny and interesting, and um, there's been something made about some of the tactics. Um, I I feel like it's a little bit overblown, but I also whereas like Borat tends to make fun of like ordinary average people and it feels cringy. These are
Mhm.
people who probably should know better and you know don't. Um, and I think it does a good job of pointing out some of the ridiculousness of some of this stuff. And so yeah, it was entertaining. I saw Reagan, and Reagan was kind of up and down for me on this front. On the positive side, I think like they told it kind of through a framework of an older Russian agent explaining to another Russian like what happened during the Cold War and why Reagan was such an important figure in the Cold War. And so I thought that was an interesting lens through which to tell Reagan's story because I think that is kind of like one of the key frameworks to who Reagan was and Reagan's life and presidency. And so they did they did tell like a good amount of his life story. I wish at some points they would have lingered longer on particular key events. Like you basically get very little of the assassination attempt on his life, which is kind of surprising. Also, one of the big events of his life was in his presidency was the Reykjavik summit with Gorbachev, and they gave that just very small treatment. So I thought there should have been. There are times where I wish they would have slowed down, and there are times there were wish I'm like, okay, you can move on from this. The other thing that I don't know if it's a legitimate criticism. It was my impression. Um, while Dennis Quaid, I think, did a good job, I always thought I was watching Dennis Quaid playing Ronald Reagan. I never thought like I'm watching Ronald Reagan. And I know you can understand the difference. Sometimes you're watching an actor playing another character, and sometimes you actually think you're watching that character. I felt a little bit about Tom Cruise or Tom not Tom Hanks playing um, Mr. Rogers. It
Mhm.
was hard to not see Tom Hanks. Um, Whereas like Gary Oldman playing Winston Churchill in Darkest Hour, or Daniel Day Lewis playing Lincoln, I felt like I was watching Lincoln. I felt like I was watching Churchill, not an actor playing that character. I felt like I was watching Dennis Quaid play Reagan. So that always is a little bit of a challenge. And so I wanted to like the movie a lot more than I ended up doing. I mean, I think it's a fine movie. It's a low budget movie, so it's not you can't expect all the bells and whistles. But I thought it was a reasonably good telling of the Reagan life story. The last one I watched was K2: The Killer Summit, and basically tells the story of the 2008 disaster on K2, where I think 11 or 12 climbers died on a particular day. And it kind of retells that story and shows some of their personal footage that they shot during the attempt to summit and come back down from uh, the basically the toughest mountain in the world. Even though Everest is higher, K2 is much more dangerous. And I am a sucker for climbing movies and mountain climbing movies. And so I watch a lot of them. And this week I leaned into several, but that was the only one that I watched that was new. It was done by the BBC. They kind of compiled the footage, and it says at the beginning that they used like 40% of the footage that the climber shot on that
Mhm.
particular adventure. So that's kind of cool to know. And interviews with the people who survived and that sort of thing. So Yeah, it was good. I recommend it if you haven't watched it. If you like that sort of thing, it's worth a watch. You can
And
currently watch
where?
it on YouTube for free.
That's what I was just gonna ask. Where is it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube for free. K2 The Killer Summit.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. You got anything else?
Go watch Beetlejuice.
There you go. That's the show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Film for Fans. Make sure you visit filmforfans.com. And until next time, enjoy the movies.